Hey everyone, we're going to take a look at building a NativeScript application that uses Couchbase as the local database. So if you're not familiar, Couchbase is actually a NoSQL database, so we're going to be doing things a little different here. We're not going to be using SQLite, we're not going to be using application settings for key value stuff. We're actually going to be using a document database in our NativeScript application. And then towards the end of this tutorial, we're actually going to take a look at seeing how to use it to synchronize between two different devices. So you'll probably notice on my screen I do have two different Android emulators running. So we're going to actually synchronize the data between these two emulators. And it doesn't have to be just Android, it could be iOS and Android or one or the other. It doesn't really matter. But we're going to use two Android simulators in this example. So to get things started, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project on our desktop. We're going to say TNS create Couchbase project, and we're going to say --ng. So this is going to be an Angular 2 project. And it's important to note that I am using NativeScript 2.1.1. You probably want anything higher than 2.0 for this to work. All right, so I do have my project on my desktop. I'm going to navigate into it. And now I'm going to install some platforms. So I'm going to say TNS platform add iOS. And now I'm going to say TNS platform add Android. And you should note that I am using a Mac, so I am able to build for iOS. If you're using Windows or Linux, well, you can only build for Android. All right. So let me go ahead and open that project directory here. So this is the project directory on my machine that I just created. It's pretty bare right now. It's got just the essentials in it. So all of our development is going to happen inside of this app folder, and it actually doesn't have anything that we need so far. So we need to go ahead and build some directories and some files first. So what we can do is we can say make directory and then -p, and we're going to type in app/components/list, and that'll go ahead and create all of the directories recursively. If you're using Windows or Linux, or maybe you don't have this command that I just used, just go ahead and create them manually. We're also going to say make directory p app/components/create. So now we need to go ahead and create a few files inside of these directories. So we can say touch, and we want to say app components list, and then we're going to say list.component.ts for TypeScript. That's going to have all of our application logic in it. We're also going to say touch app components list/list.component.html, and that's going to be our UI. We're going to do the same thing for the create directory. So touch app components create/create.component.ts, and then likewise with the HTML file. There's one more file that we need to create because we're using Couchbase. What's good for any database in general is we want to create a singleton service, so that way we can open up one instance of this database and use it throughout the session of our application. So we're going to say touch, and we're going to say app/Couchbase. Let's actually call it Couchbase instance.ts and clear. So we do have all of our files now. Since we will be using Couchbase, we've not yet added the Couchbase plugin, so we can say TNS plugin add NativeScript -Couchbase. Perfect. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and open up our project to start working with. Like I said, everything that we're going to be working on is inside of the app directory here. So let's just go ahead and open it. I'm going to open it with my editor of choice. I'm actually going to be using Atom by GitHub. You can see that I opened up an app.css file. This is actually our global style sheet. We're not going to worry about styles in this tutorial, so I'm actually going to delete everything that's in this file. And I'm going to choose save. the first thing that we want to touch is that Couchbase instance.ts file. This is going to be our singleton service or our provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to say import Couchbase from NativeScript Couchbase. You can see that there is still an error inside of my Atom editor. That is because I did not add a reference to Couchbase. So the type definitions that are included with the plugin have not yet been added. That's why TypeScript is yelling at us. So if we go one level back inside of to the root of our project and open up references.d.ts, let's go ahead and clone that line. Of course, I don't need this second part of it, but we are going to change it and say NativeScript Couchbase, and then we want to just use Couchbase and save it. So when we do that, this error should go away because now we do have type definitions to make it more TypeScript friendly. With our Couchbase plugin included here, let's go ahead and create a class. So we're going to say export class Couchbase instance, and we can proceed to adding some functions and constructors in it. So we're going to say, let's go ahead and call it public constructor. It's going to have nothing in it. That's all right. Now we're going to have public init. We'll just go ahead and create all of our functions first. Say public get database. Public start sync. And then public stop sync. And they're all going to be public by default, but for code cleanliness, I'm going to just add public in front of everything. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add a variable to be used throughout this particular service. So what we're going to say is we're going to say private database, and that's going to be of type any. We're also going to have a private pull, and that's going to be any for pull requests, or not pull requests, pull replications. We're going to have push for push replications, and then we're going to initialize stuff inside of the init. So what we're going to say is we're going to say this dot database equals new Couchbase, and we're going to specify the database we want to work with. So I'm going to call it nraboy-database. Call it whatever you want. This will create the database if it does not exist, or it'll just get it. We also want to create a view. So views are used for querying. Instead of using SQL statements, you're going to be working with views. So our view is going to be this dot database dot create view. We're going to give it a name. Let's call it people. We're going to give it a view version. So every time we need to change this view, we'll increment the version. And then we're going to pass it in a callback to work with. It's going to be document emitter. And then we're going to define some logic on how to emit. So we're actually going to just say emitter.emit. And then we're going to choose a key value pair. So we're going to say document._ID and then document. So in this scenario, we're actually just going to emit a key value pair for all people. The key is going to be the ID, and then the value is going to be the document itself. We can go ahead and add more logic, but for simplicity, we're just going to create this view like this. I'm going to write plenty of other tutorials on more complicated views to really give you an idea of how to use them. But for now, for this one, this is all we need. Now what we want to do is we want to have a get database. So we're going to say return this dot database, because remember, we're going to be working with whatever's inside of this private variable. We're not going to keep creating it. That's why we're making use of init. This init will be called one time throughout the whole application, and then we'll continue to use whatever was created. Now we're going to go ahead and create some synchronization logic. So we're going to say this dot push equals this dot database dot create push replication, and we're going to specify a URL. In this case, I'm going to say 192.168.1.56, I think it is. 56 or 57. I think I actually mixed them up. So let's leave it like this for now. If it errors at me, this is the IP of VirtualBox, but we're going to leave it like that for now. And we're going to say 4984. And we're going to specify the database. So the database is going to be Enterboy database. It does not need to match the local database. Just make sure you're consistent, whatever you choose to use. I'm going to clone this line, and we're going to say create. We're going to create a pull replication, and it's going to be against the same sync gateway for Couchbase that we're going to set up later in this tutorial. And you don't have to use sync if you don't want to. If you don't plan on using sync, just don't add these sync functions. You'll be all right. So what we want to do now is we want to say this dot push dot set continuous. So we're going to continuously be synchronizing. Again, you could change this to meet your application needs. Maybe you don't want to continuously synchronize. That's up to you. So we're going to do that for push and pull. Then we're going to say this dot push dot start. This dot pull dot start. So it'll start the synchronization process. So when we do stop, what we want to do is this dot push dot stop. This dot pull dot stop, and this will go ahead and stop any kind of synchronization that is currently happening. So before we start worrying about the actual pages of our application, I do want to validate the IP address. I want to make sure that this is the actual IP address that we're going to be using for syncing, just to really avoid any problems. It's going to bother me if I don't. So I'm going to go to my terminal, I'm going to type in ifconfig, and I'm going to get that IP address. You can see that I was wrong about the actual IP address. It should be 58. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. I am using Genymotion again. I'm not using the stock Android simulator. The IP address will be different under all scenarios, so you'll just have to double check which IP address is the one that you want to use. So I'm going to save that. What we're going to do now is we're going to worry about our first page or our first component. It's going to be the list component. So go ahead and open up the TypeScript file. We're going to worry about all of the logic first, and then we're going to worry about the UI. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to import various components. So we want to say import component from Angular core. We also want to import ngZone. We want to import router from Angular/router. We want to import location from Angular common. And then we want to import the Couchbase instance that we created. So these are all of the imports for our application. Of course, the first three are Angular 2 related, the second one being what we created. With that said, we can go ahead and create a component. So we can define the component, I mean. What we want to do is we want to add a selector. Let's go ahead and call that list, because this is going to be a list page. And more importantly, we want to define the template URL. So the template URL is going to be components/list/list.component.html. And we're going to create that next, but that's going to pair the UI to this particular TypeScript file. So now we want to type in the class information. So export class, list component, and we want to start adding all of the goods. So what we can actually do is we can start by defining some variables. We're going to define two private variables, private database of type any, and private router of type router. We're also going to define a public variable called person list, and that's going to be an array of object. So what's going on here? So the two private variables, We never need to see these from the front end layer, so they can remain private. Anything that's going to be used in the UI needs to be public. That's why we made the person list public, which is going to be populating our list view. Up next, we can define our constructor. We will actually be injecting stuff into the constructor. We're going to inject the router, the location, and then the Couchbase instance. And then inside of the constructor itself is where we can actually start initializing things. So we can say this dot router equals router. We can say, let's go ahead and say this dot database equals Couchbase instance dot get database. We can also say this dot person list equals empty array. Now there's a lot more stuff we're going to add to the constructor, but we're going to add that next. We're going to worry about other functions within this particular component first, because what comes next in the constructor is actually going to use these functions. So the first thing that makes sense is we should probably create a create method. So this method will redirect us to another page for creating actual data. So we can say this dot router dot navigate, and then we can say create. So this create is going to be what we're going to design next on the next page. We also want to create a refresh. This can be private because we never need to refresh from the UI. And refresh is actually just going to query the database and repopulate our list. So it's going to clear it out. So person list equals empty array. We're going to say let rows equal this dot database dot query. Not query, execute query. People. So people is actually the name of the view that we created in the singleton. So we're going to query that view. Now we're going to loop through the results. So we're going to say for let I equal 0, I less than rows dot length I plus plus. I'm going to say this dot person list dot push rows I. So we're going to push every result into that list, and that's going to happen. That's only going to happen when we want to repopulate the entire list. The next function that we want to add will be responsible for finding items in our list. So in the event that we add items, delete items, or change items, we need to be able to know if they're in the list and then do something appropriately. So we're going to create a private function called index of object ID. And we're going to provide it a needle. And that's going to be a type string. Needle is going to be the document ID. We're going to provide it a haystack. That's going to be a type any, but more likely than not, it's going to be an array of objects. And what we're going to do is first we're going to loop through it. We're going to loop through our haystack. So for let I equals 0, haystack dot length I plus plus. First thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that certain aspects of the haystack are true. So we're going to say if haystack I not equal to undefined. If it's undefined, we probably don't want to work with it, and we probably want to throw an error. But we won't throw an error. We're just going to say we don't want to work with it. We also want to make sure that haystack has a property called ID. So as long as those two cases are valid, then we want to see if the haystack matches the needle. So we can say if haystack I dot underscore ID equals needle, what we're going to do is we're going to return I. So we're going to return the index. If nothing is found, we're going to return -1, because that's the common thing to do in the event that something's not found. So the next thing we want to do is we want to finish off that constructor. So there's several different pieces that we're going to be working on. The first of which is we're going to start the synchronization process. So we're going to say Couchbase instance dot start sync. So it's going to start syncing in both directions continuously. while sync is happening, we probably want to be able to listen for changes against the database. So to do that, we're gonna create a listener. So we're gonna say this.database.add database change listener. We're gonna take note of the changes, and we're gonna figure out what to do with them. So we're gonna say let change index equals -1. We're going to say 4. Let I equal 0. I less than changes.length I++. And then we're going to figure out what to do with each change in that array. So we're going to say let's say let document ID equal changes I dot get document ID. So that's going to get the particular document ID of a change. We're going to say change index equals this dot index of object ID. We're going to pass it a needle. The needle is going to be the document ID. The haystack is going to be this person list. Now we need to figure out what to do. So we're going to say if change index equals -1, this means that item doesn't yet exist in the list. So we want to go ahead and add it. So we're going to say this.personList.push document. Otherwise, we're going to say this.personList. We're going to use the change index, and we're going to replace it with this new document. We're not going to handle events where there's a deletion. So we're almost done. That was our listener completed. We do need to handle the event of navigation changes. So by default, in Angular 2, when you navigate anywhere, the constructor will be fired when you navigate to. It'll never fire again when you navigate back to. So we need to be able to handle navigation events backwards in the stack. And we're going to use the location for that. So we're going to say location.subscribe. And what we're going to do is when we navigate backwards in the stack, we're going to refresh our person list. We're also going to refresh the person list the first time that we enter the constructor. So at this point, our list component should be done. We really did a lot here. We paired it with our HTML. We included a bunch of Angular stuff. You know what? One thing that we didn't do is we didn't work with ng-zone. So I did add it. Let's go ahead and inject it. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to call it private. And we're going to add it here. I'm going to initialize it. And then we're going to make use of it inside of our change index. So we're going to say this.ngzone.run, and I'll explain why in a second. Let me copy this in. Need to do it in one more place. This.ngzone.run. And I'll copy this in. So the reason why we're doing this is because this listener happens on a background thread for Android and iOS. So it's outside of the Angular 2 zone. So we have to actually update the zone. We have to apply to notify that this data has changed, so that way it updates the UI. Maybe in the future Angular 2 won't require this, but for now we do have to require that. So with that out of the way, now we can actually focus on the UI of this. So let's go ahead and open up our list component HTML. We're going to add a bit of stuff. So we're going to say action bar. We're going to give it a title. Let's say person list. We're going to give it a action button. This button's going to say create. It's going to have a tap event that calls our create method. For iOS, it's going to be positioned on the right. By default on Android, it's already going to be on the right. And then we're going to close it off. Now for the content here. So we're going to create a grid layout. And inside this grid layout, we're going to create a list view. We're going to say these particular items are going to populate that list view, the particular items being person list. Remember how we made it public. And then we're going to add a template for each row. And then for the template, though, we're going to say let item equals item. So every item in this loop is going to be called item. We're going to say label. We're going to do text in brackets because we're going to be presenting a variable rather than plain text. So we're going to say item.firstName plus some empty single quotes plus item.lastName. So although we haven't really created this object yet, each item in the array is going to be an object. It's going to have a first name and last name. So I'm going to save it. So this is all there is to the UI for this particular component, the list component. So now we're going to worry about the create component, which is the final component for this particular application. It's going to be a lot easier than the previous. However, we are going to start it off by copying the list component to save us a little bit of typing. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to open up createComponent.ts. I'm going to paste it in, but I am going to erase everything except for the constructor. But I am going to clear out the constructor, just so that way we really have a clean slate. We will not need ngZone for this particular page. We won't need the router. We will need location and Couchbase instance. We'll change list to create. We'll remove the router and ngZone here. We will remove ngZone from our injection, as well as router from the injection as well. We do not need person list in this case. We won't be working with a list on this particular page. We will be working with other stuff, so we'll be working with the location. And then two public variables. Public first name, public last name. So these two public variables are going to be bound to a form. So when you save the form, it will save to our database. So let's go ahead and initialize a few things here. So we're going to say this.database equals Couchbase instance.getDatabase, which will get the currently open instance. We're also going to initialize location equals location, and then this.firstName equals empty string, this.lastName equals empty string. We will have one function in this particular component. It'll be called save, so public save. And then we're going to say if this.firstName not equal to empty, and this dot, oops, not a comma, and this.lastName not equal to empty. That means as long as these values exist, then we're going to save it. So we're going to say this.database.createDocument, and we're going to say first name, this.firstName, last name, this.lastName. So this would be a NoSQL document rather than a row in a table. So after we save it, we're going to say this.location.back, and that's all there is to this particular file. We will be copying from the HTML file again, just to save us a little bit of typing, not by much. But I'm going to paste it in to our create component. I'm going to call it person create. I'm going to change this to save. I'm going to call that save. It's going to be position right again. We will be adding another button here this time. It's going to be a little different from the last one. we're going to be adding a back button. So we're going to say navigation item. The text is going to be back. It's going to have an and it's going to say we're going to close it off, navigation item. All right, we won't be using a grid view, we won't be using a list view, so we're going to remove it. We're going to use a stack layout instead. So this layout is going to be a a vertically aligned layout. It's going to have two different text fields. It's going to have a text field with a hint that says first name, and it's going to be bound using Angular 2's ng model. This is going to be bound to our TypeScript file, first name, because it's public. I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to call it last name, and I'm going to save it. All right, so we are now done with our two components, but we do need to set them up to be bound together. We need to worry about bootstrapping our application and adding the two routes so that way they can be navigated between. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start inside of the app.component.ts file. We're going to wipe out pretty much everything in here. It's all right. Just go ahead and wipe it out. We need to import a few things. Sorry, I removed the component. We're actually going to leave the component. We're going to import a few things to this particular file. The first thing of which we're going to import the NativeScript router. So we're going to say ns router directives. And you can tell that this is one of the first NativeScript things that we're actually including. So it's going to be NativeScript Angular /router. What we're going to do here is we're no longer going to be using template URL. We're going to be using just something that we code in here. It's going to be called page router outlet. And then we also need to add our directive that we just included. So we're going to say directives ns router directives. Another thing that we need to do is because our Couchbase singleton will be using the init to fire it off the first time. We need to do that in here because this will be the only time this page is called. It'll only be called once as soon as the application opens. So we're going to create a constructor. And before we do that, we should actually probably import it. So import Couchbase instance from Couchbase instance. What we're going to do here is we're going to say Couchbase instance, and then finally we're going to say Couchbase instance dot init. At which point we can move on to our final portion here, which would be our main.ts. So inside of the main.ts, we will need to add quite a bit. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to import another router part. So we're going to import router config from @Angular router. We're going to import another part of NativeScript. So we're going to say, what is it? NS provider provide router from NativeScript Angular /router. We are going to, let's see, did I NS provide router? Yeah, all right, that's it. We're also going to, of course, include our Couchbase. Perfect. So before we can actually define our routes, let's go ahead and import them. So import list component from component slash list slash list.component and then semicolon. We're going to add another line here. This line is going to be create component. Create. All right, so it says cannot find create component. That's probably because inside of create component we left it as titled list component. So let's go ahead and rename that. Let's go back to main and see if that corrected our problem. No, because it's components plural. Whoops. And that got rid of our errors. So now we can go ahead and we can create a new, we can go ahead and finish up our route. So we can say export constant app routes. It's going to be of type router config. And that's going to equal an array. So we're going to do an array of each one of our routes. So we're going to say path. The first one's going to be an empty string because that's our default route. And our component is going to be list component. The second one is going to be path create, and the component is going to be create component. Almost done. So now we need to inject these. So we're going to say add another array, the first of which we're going to inject Couchbase instance. So Couchbase instance. So that way we can use the singleton instance in every page of our application, and it'll be the same one. And then we can add another array, ns provide router. The first parameter is going to be app routes, and then the second being an empty object, and then we're going to add a semicolon. So in theory, this should be good to go now. There is one final bit of business that we have to take care of because we are designing our application with sync capabilities, although we don't have to. We have to create a sync gateway configuration file for our Couchbase sync gateway, which we'll be using. So go ahead and open your terminal, or you can create it manually. It's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and create a file called gatewayconfig.json. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open that file, and we're going to add just the most basic sync gateway configuration code. So it's going to be JSON. First of all, we're going to say log, and we're going to add an array here. It's going to be CRUD plus, REST plus, changes plus, and then finally attach plus. We're also going to add databases and define which database we want to use. So the database we're going to be using is called nraboy test, or nraboy database, because that's what we called it in our other file. It's not going to be using Couchbase server. It's going to be using in-memory, which, because we're just prototyping, that's perfectly fine. So what we're going to say is server. It's going to be called walrus. That's the in-memory database. And then we're going to define a sync function. So we're going to say backtick, and we're going to add some sync logic. So we're going to say function, we're going to say doc, we're going to say channel, doc.channel. So we're just going to have a single channel, and it's going to have all of our documents in it. The goal here is everyone's going to be able to access this data. So what we're going to do after the backtick, we're going to say users. So we're going to define who can access it. We're going to say guest. So we're going to allow guests. So disabled, false, then admin, channels, wildcard. All right, this should be the most basic sync gateway file. It's going to just allow us to do some sync. So at this point in time, let's go ahead and boot up our sync gateway. I have already downloaded it from the Couchbase website. I'll include the link in the comments, but you just want to go ahead and download sync gateway. Of course, it's on my desktop already, so I'm going to open it. Oops, I have caps locks on. I'm going to say sync gateway, bin sync gateway. I'm going to use that configuration file we just used. It started it up. The next thing I want to do is I want to build my application for Android. So I'm going to say TNS build Android. All right, with the project built, now we have to install it to our two simulators. Because we're using two Android simulators, we can't just say TNS run or TNS live sync because it won't know which one to install it to. So instead, let's say ADB devices. It'll show the two devices, at which point we're going to install it separately for each. So we're going to say ADB S for specifying the device, 192.168.58.102, and then the port. We're going to say install R platforms, Android, build, outputs, APK, and then I think it's called Couchbase debug.apk, and we're going to install. And we're going to do the same thing for the other simulator, which is on port 101. And then we're going to cross our fingers and hopefully it works. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at these two apps. So I've got them up on both simulators here. I'm going to choose to create. So we do have an issue with the title. We can go ahead and see what might have happened there. It's probably just a simple typo. I'm going to go ahead and add my name here. Click Save. And it did not sync, so it could be because I do have some problems with my UI here. So let's go find create.html. So action bar title, action item. So at first glance, everything looks all right. So we're gonna view some logs here. So we're gonna say ADB. We're gonna specify which one we want to use. Whoops. Let's see what we have here. So it says document is not defined in list component. So let's go into list component and see what we have. All right, so document is not defined because we never actually created it. So let's think about creating that document. We actually just need to. It's actually really simple. What we're going to do is the following. So we're just going to get that document based on its ID. So if I save it, I do have to rebuild it. So I will rebuild it. Again, if you're only using one Android simulator, you can actually use live sync. It'll be a lot faster, but it's not too big of a deal. All right, so we just rebuilt it. Let's go ahead and install it on both of our simulators again. We'll open it up. For the most part, it looked like it wanted to work though. All right, just installed on the other simulator. Click create. The header is still gone, so I probably have bugs elsewhere as well. It did sync though. So let's go ahead and go back here. We're going to go ahead and try another sync here. So let's say Maria Raboy. Click save. Something is happening. I don't think it's something good. Well, let's check it out. So we did actually have a few more errors. I went back and looked through it. It was like finding a needle in a haystack, literally, because you'll get a good kick out of what the actual errors were. So the first of all, we noticed that we had a problem with the header bar not displaying our title. That's because if we look inside of create component.html, it's not actually navigation item, it's navigation button. Which is easy to forget because the action item is actually called action item rather than action button. So that's our first problem. And that's not really our main problem. The main problem, which is really more embarrassing, is if you go back into list component.ts, our problem is actually with the index of object ID, and you wouldn't immediately know that based on the errors that are being returned, but actually it's in this for loop. So in this for loop, you'll notice that I forgot to say I less than haystack length. So it was causing some kind of weird error, an error that the logs were very vague on. But after we fix these two errors, it should work out. So if I go ahead and I open up my simulator, I'll start, Sync Gateway is already running. So I'll build it. And then what I'll do is I'll install it on both of these simulators. Perfect. So I'll go ahead and open it on both simulators. And I'll click create on one of them. You'll see that the header is there now. I'm going to go ahead and say Nick Raboy and hit save. And you can see that it did synchronize to the other simulator. So I'll go ahead and create another one. I'll call this one Maria Raboy. And I'll click save. And you can see that the sync did happen in both directions. Let's say, because I don't have an edit feature in this particular application, let's say that I want to look at the Sync Gateway dashboard here. I do have both documents there, so I'll go ahead and rename one of them. Instead of Maria Raboy, I'll say Campos, and I'll click save. The revision did change. I'll go back into the simulators, and they are accurately reflected as well. So the sync did happen. So everything is very instant. The application, minus the few errors that I had in here, was not particularly difficult to make. So it was all Angular 2. It used Couchbase. Not only did it use Couchbase as an offline local database instead of SQLite, but it also used the sync features of Sync Gateway. All of this is open source. NativeScript is open source, Angular 2 is open source, Couchbase is open source. So you can get pretty far with what we went over. Now let's say that you didn't really want to go through all of the steps that I showed you. So I did, as a courtesy to everyone, add this project on GitHub. I bundled it with the Couchbase NativeScript plugin that I personally built with the help of several people. But let's say I want to just use the demo project from there. So I'll cd out to my desktop, and I'll say git clone, and then I'll use the following URL. So I just cloned the project and the demos. Let me go ahead and close out of our current project here. And we'll go ahead and we'll open this new project. So we'll cd into it. It's NativeScript Couchbase. I'll open the folder here. We will need to make some revisions because it's revisions based on my machine. Let's go ahead and open up ng demo for Angular. I'm going to open up app, and I'm going to open up let's see here, Couchbase instance.ts. And the reason I'm opening it because the IP address is different. So I'm just going to update it based on my IP address. I'm also going to change the database because we are using nraboy database instead. Oops. So let's say I wanted to save it here. It is throwing errors, and that's because I'll show you this. Let's go ahead and say there's a process here. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to say npm run setup, and that will compile all of our TypeScript for the plugin. It's also going to download all of our dependencies. The next thing that we want to do is we want to run another script that's found in our package.json. It's called npm run prepare, but since we only care about Angular, we're going to say prepare Angular because there's two different demos in here. To save us some time, we're going to prepare the Angular version. All right, I've uninstalled the old app. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the scripts as well because I've created several scripts here. This time we're going to say npm run Android Angular. And this will launch the demo, the Angular version of the demo in, oh, you know what, it's probably going to yell at us because I have two simulators up, but at least it'll build it for us. Oh, wow, this is actually cool. So I could have been doing this the whole time and it would have saved me a lot of trouble. I didn't realize that it was going to deploy to all my open simulators, which is actually convenient. So if I wanted to do TNS run, I could do that instead of having to do ADB install. But I already had Sync Gateway running. It already had data in it. That's why it synchronized already when I opened up these two simulators. So if you wanted to, you could use the demo that I provided as well.